This right here might be the hardest to get, most desirable flight controller in all of FPV right now, the KISS Ultra FCFC. And no, I'm not bragging that I've got one because I'm a big shot YouTuber. What I am going to do though is do a setup guide for it. And if you've got a KISS FCFC because it's sometime in the future and they're actually available, then this is the setup guide for you. I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're going to learn something today. Now, if you're the kind of person who already basically knows how to wire up a flight controller, Philip Seidel has made an excellent wiring diagram for the KISS Ultra FCFC, and that may be all you need. But there's a link in the video description. Please feel free to check it out. He does great work. But I'm going to assume if you're watching this video that you need a little bit more hand-holding. And so what I want to do is I want to walk you through the process of making the wiring diagram for my flight controller and my ESC. And then hopefully you'll know what you need to do to make your own. And yeah, I do recommend that you make a wiring diagram for your build, especially if you're inexperienced or new to it. If the vendor has given you a wiring diagram with your exact gear, more power to you, just use it. But most of the time that won't be true. And you can sit down and you'll really think out problems that'll come up in your build. As you make the wiring diagram, you'll go, oh, I don't have the thing that I need or whatever. So here we are in my favorite app for making graphics, PowerPoint. What can I say? I never learned to use actual graphics programs. And the first thing you're going to notice is that I am not using a KISS ESC, which may surprise some people because KISS flight controllers have traditionally been designed to be used with KISS ESCs. It's not that you couldn't use the BL Heli ESCs that most Betaflight flight controllers use, but there are some differences in the way that KISS ESCs are wired to the flight controller and communicate with the flight controller that meant that it didn't work great if you tried to combine a KISS flight controller with a BL Heli ESC. That is no longer true with the KISS FCFC Ultra. And in fact, Alexander Fedorov, the creator, has basically said, yeah, use BL Heli ESCs. We're going to be going with a BL Heli ESC, and I think a lot of my viewers are going to be doing that because I think a lot of my viewers, like me, primarily use Betaflight. So we'll start the wiring diagram with the ground and the VBAT wires, which is how the ESC is going to feed power to the flight controller. And most ESCs are going to have these wires on them. In fact, I dare say all of them. And as we come over to the KISS flight controller, you're going to notice that there are two ground pads. It doesn't really matter which one you pick. Just pick one, and you're going to wire your ground wire to one of those two ground pads. Next, we're going to do battery voltage. So we'll go ahead and make a red line. And we'll put that from VBAT there. And oh, this couldn't be more convenient. It's going absolutely to the right place. It's going to BAT+, and that's where battery voltage is going to go. The KISS flight controller can take between 2 and 6S input, like most flight controllers today, and that's probably what you're flying. Now, as far as the motor wires go, that's so straightforward, I'm not even going to bother to draw the lines. Motor 1 goes to motor 1, 2, 3, and 4. No problem there. Next, let's tackle this TX wire coming out of the ESCs, and that's going to be yellow, so I'll make that yellow. And the TX wire coming out of a BL Heli 32 ESC, sometimes it's labeled TLM instead. It's used for BL Heli ESC telemetry. And I've got another video talking about what kind of information is in BL Heli ESC telemetry. And the name of that video is actually why you probably don't need to care about using BL Heli 32 ESC telemetry. Because most of the stuff that ESC telemetry carries, the information that it can communicate, is not needed or is communicated through some other means that is superior. So in this day and age, I wouldn't actually even bother with it under most situations. There are a few exceptions, and I go into them in that video, and I'll put a link to that video down in the video description if you want to check that out. If you choose to use BL Heli 32 ESC telemetry, then you're going to wire that, as you might have guessed, to the TLM pad. Just make that wire nice and neat like so. There we go. The last wire here is labeled CUR. It stands for current sense, and that is analog current sense. So this wire is used by the ESC to tell the flight controller how many amps the motors are pulling. Some people would consider that information to be pretty useful, especially because it also lets you calculate milliamp hours, which can tell you how much battery life you've got left. it can be a little bit confusing to think about analog current sense because ESC telemetry in BLHeli also sometimes carries current sense information. It's the same information just being reported in two separate ways. But these days, most ESCs don't put current sense in the telemetry. They only report it via analog. So this is going to be a high priority function to get wired up. And if you look over here at the KISS flight controller, there isn't a corresponding pin for it. And in fact, that's true. There isn't. What we're going to do instead is we'll make a new wire. We'll make it green. So it matches. Got to have all the colors matching, right? And we will edit points. That is going to go to the CC pad on the flight controller. And this is going to annoy some of you. Frankly, it annoys me as well because it means that it's annoying to have to go direct solder that wire instead of having it be nicely put in the plug. There isn't a workaround for that. That's just what you have to do. And it is a downside of using a BLHeli ESC with a KISS flight controller. So be it. And that is it. That is how we're going to wire our KISS Ultra flight controller to our BLHeli 32 ESC. It's not that complicated, really. Motor 1234 to motor 1234, ground to ground, VBAT to VBAT, current sense to CC, and TX. If you're going to do ESC telemetry, which I personally would consider to be optional under most circumstances, TX goes to TLM, or you can leave that out if you prefer. Now, the first thing I got to do is build a new plug for the flight controller. And you'll notice I've left it plugged into the flight controller because plugs between ESCs and flight controllers are often directional. You can't, unless they're just straight through, you can't necessarily just reverse them. So I don't want to accidentally get it the wrong way around. This end is going to go in my ESC and it's going to stay the same. This end is going to get redone for the KISS flight controller. This is an SH 1.0 cable set. I'll put a link in the video description where you can buy one of these, but it comes with a whole bunch of these plugs of different sizes and a whole bunch of these pre-crimped cables, and you can basically just build your own in whatever size you need. Don't go thinking, oh, I'll just buy a crimping tool and make my own. It is not worth the time. Trust me. Next, I'm going to bring in my wiring diagram, and I'm going to plug the plug into the flight controller, and I'm going to hold the flight controller in the same orientation as the wiring diagram, and I'm going to look at my wiring. And the reason I do that is because I've built these headers before. I've built them, and oops, I accidentally built it upside down. So instead of going left to right, it goes right to left, and when you plug it into the flight controller, it's the wrong way around. So this is going to ensure that I'm looking at it correctly and it is the correct way around. And I am extremely unlucky in that not one of these wires is actually in the right place. So I'm going to have to just repin the whole thing. Dang. Oh well. I guess I just got to pull them all out of the plug. I'm going to do that with this hobby knife here. And I'm also going to get a little bit of this blue tack, which is going to help hold the plug in place while I'm working on it. And basically what I need to do is lift this little retention tab and pull the wire out. Starting on this side, the very first wire is VBAT. As long as we get the first one right and then we go from there, everything will be okay. Now, I'm not going to be able to fully insert this with it plugged in, but I'm just going to pull it out and keep it right side up, and it's going to go in that way. And then once it's inserted, just give it a little tug to see if the retention clip has engaged, because you don't want that coming out. And it has engaged. All right. Now I don't need to worry about getting it upside down or backwards anymore, so I'm going to set the KISS flight controller aside, and I'm just going to work through the diagram. And there it is. And yeah, your chances of actually noticing if you've made a mistake at this point are very slim. So be super, super careful as you're building it that you're doing it right. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to plug it into the flight controller. And I'm just going to double, triple check that I've got VBAT and ground in the right place, because that's what'll fry something if it's wrong. And I do. The rest of it you could fix after the fact. Next, we're going to mount the flight controller in the quadcopter. We'll make sure we do it facing forward. It's got a front-facing arrow here. If we needed to mount it not facing forward for some reason, we certainly could. It can fix that in software, but It's always nice to get it right, and I can see that I'm going to need some spacers here to give a little bit of room, otherwise it will be resting on my ESC, and it's never good when the electricity touches the electricity and goes where it's not supposed to go. Next, it's time to solder up this current sense wire. For the receiver, everybody's instructions are going to be different depending on what type of receiver you've got. And here, the wiring diagram by Philip Seidel is an excellent, excellent reference. A beautiful thing about the KISS Ultra is that all of the receivers wire up basically the same. And that is especially surprising if you're using a FreeSky receiver, because you can see they've got the S-Bus wire going to RX, the receiver RX, and the SmartPort telemetry wire going to receiver TX. That's really surprising. FreeSky receivers usually put S-Bus on one UART and SmartPort on a separate UART, despite the fact that one uses an RX pad and one uses a TX pad, so you'd think they could use the same UART number. I don't know what KISS is doing under the scene, behind the scenes here, but the bottom line is that wiring them up is pretty straightforward. So let me just paste in another copy of the KISS flight controller, which will keep the wiring diagram from getting a little cluttered. This is the top. We're looking at the top now. So here's the top and here's the bottom. The ESC plug is on the bottom, and then everything else is on the top. And then we'll also paste in my Ghost receiver. And then this wire here, labeled SRXL2, that is the Ghost signal wire. But unlike in Betaflight 4.2, where Ghost protocol wasn't supported and you had to use SRXL2, KISS fully supports the Ghost protocol, so we're going to be using Ghost. The wiring is the same either way. We're just going to take that wire and we will make it green, and we will take that to the UART TX pad on the flight controller. Ghost goes to a UART TX, not RX, like most receivers. It's a little bit backwards from what you might expect, but it's okay. There we go. Perfect. All right, great. And then the 5 volt goes to 5 volt and ground goes to ground. We're not going to draw those wires. You got the idea. Next, we come to the video transmitter and the camera. Now, I'm going to be using DJI, but we'll do the analog setup first because a lot of people are using analog. And in fact, Alexander Fedorov actually thinks KISS flies better on analog because it's like optimal for lower latency. So here is the Philip Seidel wiring diagram for analog. There's a couple of little gotchas I want to call out. The first thing I want to call your attention to is this ground pad here labeled C ground, which is camera ground. And that is specifically the ground pad for the camera power. And I don't know the exact details, but there's something about the way that that pad's wiring has been done inside the flight controller to help minimize interference and noise that's going to mess up your analog video sync pulses. I asked whether it was necessary to use the same camera ground if you were doing digital, and Alex said no, but I don't think it would hurt. And oftentimes digital systems also will benefit from a cleaner signal. So that's where your camera ground should go. And then as far as powering the camera goes, it gets a little trickier. They show the camera going to VBAT, and that'll work for many cameras. Many cameras today will work on up to like 35 or 40 volts, so way higher voltage than most people are using. If you have a camera that requires 5 volts, though, it's going to be a little tricky because the only 5 volt output on this flight controller is here on the receiver section. Now, there is nothing stopping you from soldering your camera and your receiver to the same 5 volt pad. There's literally nothing wrong with that. It just makes your wiring a little bit messy, but it makes your wiring a little bit messy. The other place you can get 5 volts is here in these two series plugs. So in theory, you could create a plug and you could pull 5 volts from that plug and feed it to your camera, again, if you had a 5 volt camera. Messy wiring, not the best. The placement of the video wire for the camera is pretty straightforward. The video wire goes to VI, stands for video in. So that's the camera. What about the video transmitter? The video transmitter in this example is the TBS Unify Pro 32, but basically any analog video transmitter is going to wire up the same, with a couple exceptions that I'll get to. Video goes to the VO pad, video out. Smart audio, if the video transmitter supports smart audio, is going to go to the SA pad. And power, that's the sort of gotcha. The assumption here is that you're going to be powering it from VBAT, so it's going to go to these plus and minus pads here. That's on the other side. It's here and here on the top of the board, same pads. And again, the catch is going to be if you've got a video transmitter that requires 5-volt input for some reason, you have the same contingency with the camera. You could theoretically pull it off the 5-volt pad here or the 5-volt pin here. If, on the other hand, you're using DJI, here's how you wire it up. And we're going to do this with the KISS Vista here, but it's the same with the air unit. The wires are the same. And we'll start with a red wire for power. And this is KISS Vista, so it's going to be powered from VBAT. Alrighty. And then ground, of course, is going to go right next to it. No problem. We'll make that black. And then we've got TX and RX, and those are going to just go to any unused UART on the board. So here we've got TX6 and RX6, and since we're using DJI, we're not going to be using those for camera control, so we may as well use those. We've also got TX4 and RX4 here on the underside of the board we could use. And we've also got TX3, RX3, and TX1, RX1 here. And we could use those, but since they're in a plug, I find it kind of annoying to have like some of the wires in a plug and some of the wires soldered. I don't know why, it just bugs me. So I probably wouldn't use those, although you certainly could. So RX on the Vista is going to go to TX on the flight controller. That's almost always the way that it is. RX on the one goes to TX on the other, and then TX on the Vista, we'll make that one, make it white, is going to go to RX on the flight controller. That's how that's going to get wired up. And then finally, we've got the ground and S-bus, and if you are not using the DJI controller, then you won't use those. Those are only used if you are using the DJI controller. If you are using the DJI controller, the S-bus wire is going to go to receiver RX, but since we're not using the DJI controller, we're just going to ignore those completely. Now, I'm using the KISS Vista, and the Vista is rated for up to 6S voltage. So as long as I'm using 6S or below, then I can run the Vista off of VBAT, and it's fine. But if you're using the air unit and you're using a 5S or a 6S battery, you've got a problem. The air unit is only rated for up to 17 volts. And unfortunately, there isn't really a great solution to that issue on the KISS Ultra flight controller because it has a 5-volt regulator, but the air unit needs a minimum of 7 volts. And that's it. It's got 5 volt, it's got VBAT. Now, what many flight controllers will do is they'll put a 10 volt or a 9 volt or a 12 volt regulator on the flight controller specifically to power the air unit. For a situation like this, that's not going to be an option. So if you have an air unit and you're running 6S and you're using this flight controller, you need to go buy an external voltage regulator to power it and wire it up. And I'll put a suggested one down in the video description if you need that. Good news, they've put the receiver pads on the back of the flight controller, so my pre-existing wires will reach. Yay! Well, my pre-existing wires here will not quite reach to the... I guess they kind of will, but boy, I don't like having to have that much. Yeah. If I untwist them, they'll just barely reach, I guess. I don't like it. I like to have my wires twisted so it takes the slack out of them. But I don't want to take this whole thing out and resolder it either, so we're going to see what we can do. And we're going to just put some extra twists in this power wire because it's way too long. This is going right there. Maybe unwrap it around here to help take out some of the slack. Yeah, that'll work fine. Well, dang, that went quickly. Before I power it up, there's a basic check that I'm going to do that's going to save me if I have screwed up the wiring. I'm going to get my multimeter out. I'm going to put it in continuity check mode. That's the mode where it beeps when there's continuity between the probes. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put put one of the probes on the negative prong of the XT60. I'm going to just take a ground location. A good location is the outside of the USB plug because it's always grounded. Sometimes it's got a little bit of a coating on it, and so you could just use a ground wire that you soldered to. And we're going to make sure that ground has continuity to ground everywhere on the board, and it does. Yay. Great. And then we're going to check positive as well. We're going to put it on the positive pin of the XT60, and we're going to check VBAT. And it does. That's great. By checking continuity, starting at the XT60 and going all the way through to the flight controller, you're making sure that you've got your positive and your negative right all the way, basically making sure you didn't screw up your ESC plug or any of your soldering or anything like that. So when you plug in, you have minimal chance of frying something. I guess I should do another check, and that is a check between the positive and negative to make sure I haven't made a short circuit somewhere. And sure enough, I have not. So for that check, we do not want to hear a beep. Now sometimes you'll hear a very short beep when you do that check. The check between the two prongs, that's the capacitor charging up, but the beep stops. So, okay, we're good. It is wired right, and we do not have continuity between the prongs. Only one thing to do. The moment of truth. The moment when we power this monkey up. And for power, it's off camera, you can't see it. I'm using the Toolkit RC P200 power supply. It's a nice it's little. That's one of the advantages of it. It's a little bench power supply. I've got a review of it on my channel. I'll put a link in the video description as always if you want to check it out. If you're looking for a power supply to power your gear on the bench, it's not perfect, but for the price, the size, it's pretty nice. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. No smoke. I pressed the off button by accident. I was really worried there for a minute. Nothing happened, and then the power supply turned off. Okay, let's do it again. 3, 2, 1. No smoke. Fantastic. Everything's powered up. We got a receiver. The KISS Vista is getting warm, and the flight controller is obviously talking to the ESC because we heard the full BLHeli startup tones. The only thing left to do now is head over to the computer and configure this flight controller. Let's do it. Now, it's super cool that you can configure your KISS Ultra using the on-screen display, and I am so looking forward to trying that out. But since this quadcopter has DJI, we won't be doing that. We're going to be using our computer. And there is a KISS Ultra configurator you can download. The website is kissultra.com. I'll put a link to that in the video description, of course. And if you want to download and install the GUI as a standalone app, you can do that using this link down in the lower right, native GUI. But we're going to use the web configurator. And one nice thing about the web configurator is that it's always up to date. As new updates come out, it'll of course always be updated. So we're going to choose web serial. You do need Chrome to do this. I'm pretty sure it's usually the case. And the first time you do this, if you have never used a Chrome web serial app before, when you hit connect, it'll ask you for permissions, and you'll need to give permissions. But I've already done that, so I don't think you're going to see that dialog from me. And we will plug in a USB to our flight controller. So nice that it powers up the receiver as well. That's going to make it so much easier to configure. And then we're just going to hit connect. And we'll see the serial port here that it wants to connect to. We'll say connect, and it's going to ask us if we want to switch to Ultra default PIDs. I'm not trying to take credit for things I didn't do, but I said recently that I would always test a flight controller first on default PIDs. And sometime after I said that, the KISS Ultra default PIDs changed to be the crunked golden tune or something very close to it, which is a much more refined PIDs. Fair enough. If it's the defaults, it's the defaults. We're going to go with it. I am going to switch to the Ultra default PIDs. Default's default, right? What else do we need to do? Should I start with flashing the flight controller? Do we need to flash to a new firmware, or does it have the latest? Select remote firmware. KISS Ultra FC Ultra. Which firmware version is on right now? 201 Beta 23. Well, I reckon it's probably newer than the one I got now. Let's see, 200. Oh yeah, let's update the firmware first. So we'll go to FC Flasher. We'll select remote firmware 201 Beta 23. We'll be on the latest. Download firmware. Flash firmware. Now this is a downside of the browser-based method. If at this point you like load your browser window or something, it'll be bad. Don't do that. I mean, you wouldn't want to quit your app either, but you might be more likely to accidentally click away in a browser window. Your KISS flight controller is not activated. Okay, activate. Okay, great. We are on the Ultra default PID still. Let's see how we can get our receiver working. Receiver type is not Crossfire. It is IRC Ghost. And let's just save that. And let's see if we have movement in that. I think we need to go to data output and we can see, oh yeah, we do. We have movement in the sticks. The channel mapping is not correct. So I don't believe that KISS lets you remap the channels in the flight controller. For KISS, you have to change the channel order in your controller. So here's what I'm going to do. The first thing I'm going to do is select model, and we're going to take my ghost model and long press and duplicate model. We're going to go down to the duplicate ghost model and select it. And then we're going to model key, model name, and we're going to change the model name to, can I just use the keyboard? Thank you. We're going to name that, we're going to need a separate KISS. The next thing I need to do is rearrange the order of the channels in my radio's mixer screen. So I'm going to press the model key. I'm going to page to the mixes screen, and this part always messes me up because I can never like keep the logic straight. What let's do is let's start with aileron. Okay, that's clearly not the aileron channel, so we're going to go up, we're going to highlight channel 1, aileron mixer, we're going to long press and move, and then I'm going to scroll down to, it seems to be moving the throttle channel. Which channel moves aileron? It's wherever I have the pitch channel, that's where it thinks aileron should be, so that's channel 2. So let's long click and paste before. Okay, throttle is good to go. Yaw is good to go. Roll is good to go. And pitch is good to go. Hallelujah. Next, we'll do flight modes. We'll go to the configuration tab. And what let's do is let's just go to channel 5, edit. Let's go to source. And then I'm just going to flip that switch for my arm switch. It's going to be SF. Great, that's all I have to do. That's channel 5. So ARM is going to be channel 5 aux 1, and it's going to be high or low. Let's look. So with SF in the ARM position, the channel 5 is low. So ARM is going to be aux 1 low. Great. Press the model key. We're going to go over and we're going to set up our next mode is going to be this switch here. We're going to edit. Source is going to be this switch here. Let's just set up the rest of the switches while we're here. Channel 7, edit. Source is going to be my momentary. And those are my basic. Those are the 3 switches I use for almost everything. So I'm going to just move that switch. That's channel 6. And what we're going to have is auto level is going to be aux 2, channel 6. In the middle position, and turtle mode is going to be aux 2 in the high position. That's how I like to have my switches set up. And then we're going to do buzzer is going to be aux 3, channel 7 in the high position. There you go. Those are my basic aux modes. Next up, what are we going to do? Got a controller set up. We should probably test the motors. Okay, for this step, we will have our props off because we're going to spin the motors. That is mandatory. We're going to power up. Oh, and we're going to, I think KISS uses the controller to power the motors for this motor test. So we're going to go to advanced. No, we're going to go to data output. Yes. We're going to hit the motor test. I know what I am doing. We're going to enable motors test, and we're going to pick which motor we want to test. And then, yep, that's working. So we're just going to raise the throttle on the controller, and that's going to make the motor speed up. And we'll double check. Okay, so that is motor 1 is the upper left motor. That is correct. And which direction is it spinning? The correct direction. Good. All right. Motor number 2 should be the upper right. No, it is not. Motor number 3 should be the... That is not correct either. Okay, so our motor mapping is not correct. How do we fix that? Let's go back to configuration. And we got a motor output mapping here. Is there just an option for Betaflight? Betaflight. Oh, thank God. Betaflight motor output mapping. Hallelujah. Let's just hope that fixes it for me. No, because my ESC is flipped around, isn't it? Oh, this is going to be a pain. Let's cross our fingers that that's right. I'm not sure that it's going to be, though. All right, so I've drawn this diagram, which is going to help me get this fixed. And the diagram shows where KISS wants the motor to be, 1, 2, 3, 4, versus where the motor actually is, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me power cycle everything, and let's take a look at the options for the motor output mapping. I wish I had a diagram, a graphic. Are you going to show me a graphic? Will the graphic update? It won't. Oh, it does update. Oh, that's fantastic. So I can just change here and look at the graphic over here and compare it to my notes here and see which one matches. So let's see. Default. No, I want 1, 3, 2, 4. No, I want 1 in the upper left. Wait, 1, no. That's what I've got. That's the correct layout. Well, that's not the most elegant solution, but I did find a solution that works. And let's just check all of them and make sure they're spinning props in the correct direction. Yeah, they are. Okay, fantastic. Here, use advanced serial configuration is where we're going to set up the rest of the UARTs. Let's see. We're going to leave serial 1 and serial 2 alone. Presumably that's the receiver, and yeah, that's all how it needs to be. But we want the DJI OSD is going to be on UART 6. And it looks like that is set. It looks like they've set all the UARTs that are not currently being used to be KISS protocol or OSD, which is actually really smart. So it means that basically wherever you solder up your DJI Air unit, it's going to just work. That's smart. VTX configuration is none of the above. Buzzer emulation, emulate with motors, yes please. That's going to cause the motors to go beep, beep, beep because we don't have a buzzer on this quad. We're going to leave all of that alone. We do need to change the CC pad mode from camera control to current sensor. And we need the divider, which is this calibration, which we don't have that information. There are instructions on the KISS Ultra website on how to calibrate that, and we're not going to do that right now. So I'll put a link in the video description to how to do that. That, I think, use custom D-shot routing. No. Is that where you can custom remap the motors? I'm going to break something. Oh, it is. That's where you can do arbitrary motor reordering if you just wanted to change the motor order. Holy Jiminy. Oh, rates. Whew. I have no idea. Like what KISS rates I might want. I might need to just manually figure out rates, because I've copied my rates over from Betaflight to KISS. There are converters, and I did not like the feel of them. So maybe I'll find some freestyle rates on a preset somewhere. That's it. We're done. And there's nothing to do now but go fly the quadcopter. All I've got to say to you right now is thank you so much for watching. I hope you get subscribed because I will be doing a comparison of the KISS Ultra, the FetTech G4, and Betaflight 4.3 on identical quads so that we can get a sense of, you know, how they stack up. And I know you're going to want to see that and you're not going to want to miss it. Also, can I remind you that I have a Patreon page. Patreon is a website where you can subscribe to me for as little as $2 a month or more if you feel like I've earned it. It's completely up to you how much money you decide to put in. If you just got to the channel and you're like, who is this guy and how dare he ask me for money? That's fine. I give away all my content for free. Keep watching, keep learning. And if you keep coming back, eventually, hopefully someday you'll hit a point where you go, yeah, okay, I'm going to do it. If that today is that day for you, there's a link in the video description at patreon.com where you can subscribe. As a bonus, you get access to my Discord server where there are a whole bunch of super helpful, super smart people to help you with it. The kind of people like me who can't help but be helpful and knowledgeable about FPV. It's one of the bonuses. But mostly you just get to feel good about supporting me because you value what I do. And if that's not how you feel, then get the heck out of here. Come back, watch a different video. It's fine. I don't know where. I'm just going to leave it. I don't know what happened there. I kind of ran out of steam. Thanks for watching, guys. Happy flying. What are you doing in here? The least you could do is subscribe or join my Patreon or, like, just here's another video I picked out for you. Jeez.